Hi everyone, and welcome to StudioJake Movie Makeover Masterpiece. On this podcast, we take a film that on paper should have been good. Maybe it had a dynamite director, an awesome cast, the trailer just dazzled you, but when you saw it, whether at home or in the theater or you saw it through a streaming service, whatever the case may be, you were like, where did this go wrong? Myself and a special guest, we're going to be talking about these movies, where they went wrong, and how we can fix them. So sit back, relax, and welcome to StudioJake Movie Makeover Masterpiece. Released in 2004, Blade Trinity is the last film in the Vampire Hunter trilogy starring Wesley Snipes. Coming off the widely received second part, this third film had everything working for it. Screenwriter David S. Goyer was chosen to direct. Wesley Snipes returned to the role of Blade with the additions of Jessica Biel, Ryan Reynolds, Patton Oswalt, Dominic Purcell, and popular WWE wrestler Triple H. However, the film was hampered by a feud between Goyer and Snipes, the latter of whom would only appear for close-ups and later sued the production company New Line Cinema, claiming unpaid wages. It was also criticized for its campy humor, carbon copying of previous films' plots, and lack of substance. Joining me today is the host of GroupThink podcast, Tyler Hummel, whose film commentary has appeared in Geeks Under Grace, Legal Insurrection, and Hollywood and Toto. All right, Tyler, how do we fix Blade Trinity?
Well, that precludes the possibility that this is just completely lackadaisical and a lost cause, but this isn't necessarily a complete wash of a movie as far as I can tell. I mean, this feels like the kind of film where they shot the first draft or the first draft of the script and they didn't actually bother to go back and refine anything. Like, I had been kind of led to believe this is some sort of unwatchable abomination of a film, and it's not, but it's really not slick in the way that any of the other Blade movies are. It's very scattershot. There's tons of ideas in it, but none of them form in anything. And this is the kind of thing you see with the first draft of a script. So as like a schlock action movie, it's fine on its own terms, but I get why this movie killed off the franchise. There's just nothing coming out of it on the other end. Like by the time the movie gets to its final shots, I'm like, well, it's over, and I never have to watch Wesley Snipes' Blade ever again. So.
And also, I want to go ahead and pause for a moment. Spoiler warnings. Just because of the nature of this conversation, there probably will be spoiler warnings. We had it when I talked to Misty, when I talked to Kelly. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that out there. Spoiler alert! If you haven't seen Blade Trinity,
16-year-old movie that everyone tells you not to watch.
You'd be surprised. I talked about an older movie once. I talked about the original Blade Runner once, and I literally got an angry message. Spoiler alert! And like, it happens, and so by chance, if you haven't seen Blade Trinity, this is your spoiler warning. We'll probably get down, and I agree with you, and I really felt like the story was kind of, like you said, a little discombobulated. I didn't like, and everything happens so fast, so it's just like, Whisper's dead. Oh my gosh. Blade's arrested. Oh my gosh, he's Whisper. Or he's rescued. Whisper has a daughter. What's going on here? And it's like, everything just bam, 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 bam. And to me, at some point in the film, I felt like, because they have Patton Oswalt, right? And I felt like at some point in the film, they realized, oh wait, we have Ryan Reynolds. And so then all of a sudden, it's like, cause I guess especially in the first part of the film, Patton Oswalt is getting all the best lines of dialogue, and then all of a sudden in the second act, it just shifts, and Ryan Reynolds is getting all the good dialogue. And it's kind of funny because my sister, who will remain nameless, she actually doesn't like Ryan Reynolds. She doesn't like any of his films, even the good ones. Like, I love Lady in Gold. My sister hates it, and so I guess he's an acquired taste. I didn't know this about him. I thought everyone loved him. So, but anyway, my point is, I felt like that was kind of, as far as secondary characters, that was a big shift. And it's like a lot of the burden from what carried the movie forward fell on it, went from Patton Oswalt and Jessica Biel even who of course plays Whisper's daughter, to Ryan Reynolds. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that assessment?
More or less. I mean, the first two Blade movies, Blade is kind of the character who everything circles around, but he's not necessarily the most important or interesting character from a story perspective. So the first one's obviously it's about the girl character who's just hanging out with him and learning about his world, and then the grizzled cowboy Obi-Wan Kenobi, what's his name?
Whisper.
So it's basically just the world around Blade, and he's the catalyst for moving it forward. So yeah, in terms of the cast, it's all just them kind of jumping around. It feels a lot like we can talk about the cast when we get to the cast section specifically, but in terms of like the way this is structured, it reminds me of like a J.J. Abrams movie where you have like 5 core ideas that are the central plot of the story, which like Blade gets caught by the police on a security camera, and now he's a famous vigilante. Blade teams up with another team of vampire hunters. Blade fights a Sumerian god and the first vampire. Okay, these are all ideas. You could make a movie about Blade doing any of these things, and it's just throwing it all at the wall, and it just wants to try everything and see what works. Maybe we can talk about David Goyer, because I think about David Goyer the way you think about Zack Snyder, is I think Goyer is probably the more hackish person in the room in most of the instances. Like, I watched Red Letter Media's video on the original Blade, and apparently if you go back and listen to like the original commentary tracks in the first Blade movie, at some point David Goyer's like, yeah, my 2 weaknesses as a screenwriter are dialogue and scene writing.
Whoa.
And so you're just suck as a writer. Okay. And now the guy obviously
what does he write?
Yeah, the guy gained a huge reputation off of these movies, and made the Dark Knight trilogy, made Man of Steel, and wrote at least the first draft of Batman versus Superman. So the guy's just kind of been propelled by his ability to work with really talented people like Guillermo del Toro and Christopher Nolan for the most part. But yeah, I mean,
I feel like maybe he's saying, and see, this is a problem I have with Hollywood, is someone will do a good job at that one thing, and then they'll give them all the things. And so, like, maybe in David Goyer's case, and I agree with you in your assessment. I do think I honestly feel like he takes a lot of the credit for writing the Dark Knight trilogy, but really Nolan and his brother wrote most of that, but he goes around and said, I wrote it. And it's like, no,
well, you got the Hollywood screen credit, and that's all that matters. So
right. And so maybe he's the idea man. He comes in with all these good ideas. And see, that's how I kind of see more J.J. Abrams, is he's the idea man. And then when you put him in the director's chair, you're kind of like, and to be fair to J.J. Abrams, he's very hit and miss. So the first Star Trek remake,
yeah,
good film. And I found out I was in the minority of this. Maybe maybe you and I can do another video on this, but Super 8. I actually like Super 8. I understand there's some people who don't like it, but I actually enjoy it. But then you move on to some of his other films, and you feel like this is just kind of mediocre. It's not really that as good as as people are telling me it is. And maybe it's the same with Goyer, because I believe Blade Trinity was the first movie he directed.
Yeah.
And so, it's like, okay, he has his thing. Let him do his thing. Does that make sense? And I wonder if there was some of that going on. What do you think?
Kinda. I mean, the director of the first Blade, I don't know what else he's done, but he's not like a huge name. So
right.
when it comes to the Blade movies, it's not like the most, like, other than like Guillermo del Toro on the second one, these aren't like the best Hollywood names working together. Like, the first two ones will work because they're really slick action movies. They're
right.
not complex. They're focused. The special effects well, cool is kind of overstating it by modern standards, because
for their time they were good.
Well, this is like peak 90s cool, like embarrassing leather clothing and
animated 2004.
It's raining blood. So it's a lot of stuff like that that's just kind of it's a little bit embarrassing now, but it's in the first two movies it's fine. By the third movie, it's really lackadaisical, and I wonder if even beyond the script issues, because I like the directing is for the action scenes, it's fine. The action choreography is fine. Doesn't quite have the edge of the first two movies, but there's not as much imagination to it. Like, this is, you can definitely tell this is like, the fight scenes are like the ones that are like they're running out of ideas, so they're just kind of throwing things in there, and they're never offensively bad or anything. It's just that they never really attain any heights. I guess that's my biggest problem with the film at all, is that it's just kind of a flat line. Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't achieve anything, but it's not gratuitously awful either.
Right.
Sorry if I'm kind of jumping around and touching a lot of things. This movie is throwing my brain into chaos.
Well, no, and that's fair. And now going to the directing part, you know, we've talked about the technical aspects of it and whatnot. What about, like, if you were to pick a director to round out this trilogy, you know, because each one had a different director. Would you have maybe tried to get Del Toro back, or would you have gotten someone else? How would you have, if you were producing this film, who would you pick to direct it, to move this franchise forward, if it was to have, say, 2 more films?
That's a good question. If I'm like Hollywood's most serious Blade fan, and I've decided I want to like resurrect the Blade films and get 2 more great films out of it, I would say maybe like the guy who did Equilibrium, because you don't need like the Wachowskis to do something like this. You need someone who's a competent action director. You need someone who's a competent screenwriter. I would say bring in someone who's like a middle row guy, like the Equilibrium people or something like that, because you just need someone who can handle the action and who can just hone the script into something that is focused on something. Like, it doesn't even need to be a complex story about Blade coming to grips with his mortality or handing off his weapon to the next generation. It doesn't need to be anything complicated. It just needs to be Blade fights this guy, and he does it for this reason. Like, I would consult Blade 2 for an example of how to build on the premise. It's just, oh, there's another kind of vampire we have to fight, so we have to team up with the old vampire. It's like the bigger Jaws joke from Family Guy. Oh, the fishermen and Jaws have to team up to fight bigger Jaws. But maybe not do that for this third movie. Just gotta hone it into something specific. You don't need it doesn't need to be 5 separate ideas.
And also, this was at a time when, you know, this is before the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is when DC was still doing films. They were doing them as separate, and Marvel at first was trying to copy that idea. Hence, you know, we have the Tobey Maguire trilogy of Spider-Man films. We've got Blade trilogy with Wesley Snipes, and there was even talk that John Singleton was going to do Black Panthers with Wesley Snipes, I believe, but I think that script never came to fruition because John Singleton actually wanted to make him a Black Panther revolutionary instead of the King of Wakanda. And so Wesley Snipes knows his audience is like, no, that's not going to happen. But legend has it there's a script of Black Panther out there in the aether with this premise. But anyway, I agree with you. I felt like also too, like, you can kind of see, because right now, you know, you've seen me on Twitter get angry about you know, how Martin Scorsese talks about comic book films, or what's his name, Francis Ford Coppola, which I find that really ironic since his whole claim to fame is the Godfather trilogy. But one thing I have noticed is, okay, so you have Del Toro directing the second film, and at the time, this is when Del Toro was at his peak of filmmaking, and he's this big Hollywood director. I don't think you could get him back to direct another Marvel film. You know, it seemed like, because even at one point, James Cameron was going to direct Spider-Man before Sam Raimi took over. And so it seems like before there wasn't this aversion to comic book films as it was. And I think that era where Blade Trinity was in it was kind of like, okay, we're leaving that model behind and we're moving to cinematic universes. Do you think it kind of got, because, you know, by then the X-Men franchise is kicking off, right? It's 2004, so the X-Men franchise is kicking off. Do you think that maybe that had something to do with it? It just got caught in this cog of how the comic book film industry is shifting?
My temptation is to say no, because I don't think Hollywood got the cinematic universe bug until about 2012. Because I don't think anyone thought it was going to work before Avengers. So at this point, we're still operating in the, like, what's the guy at 20th Century Fox that hated the X-Men movies and he hated comic book characters, so he just wanted to tone it down and make it so the character there's no color, it all has to be muted, it all has to be like that. It's like, because this was kind of the still time when they thought that you had to tone down comics in order to make them applicable as a wide release sort of thing. So obviously something like Blade, it hit even before Spider-Man and X-Men. It was really born out of like the Matrix craze. It's really born out of that more than anything. So it kind of extending as long as it did, I'd say that it kind of falls into the same trap like the Matrix sequels fell into, where they just didn't have enough steam, so they just kind of fizzled out. I wouldn't say this is necessary that this movie in particular got screwed over because of the greater cause of Hollywood. I just say it's natural. It'd be more natural entropy because obviously, like how many of the Matrix spin-offs were actually good movies other than like Equilibrium and maybe The One. Like there were so many bad ones, and that aesthetic was dead by the time Matrix Revolutions came out.
That makes sense. And now we're going to move on to, because we already talked about story, David Goyer, and now I want to get your opinion on the cast, because this is actually where I have the biggest issue with it, not with obviously Wesley Snipes returning as Blade or Ryan Reynolds or Jessica Biel, but I feel like the villain, Dominic Perel, at the time, now he would be perfect for the role, but I feel like at the time he was too young to play Dracula. That's just my opinion. I felt like they should have gotten someone like a Jeremy Irons who has this, or maybe a younger Jeremy Irons. And don't forget, he's younger in 2004, right? You know, still old, but younger. I felt like they should have had someone who was so imposing, because I never felt intimidated by him. And say what you want to about Avengers Age of Ultron. I know my opinion on that film is controversial. I still felt like Ultron was a threatening presence, at least in certain parts of the film. And same with a good Marvel villain like Loki, especially in the first Avengers, his presence is a threatening one, albeit to a different degree. So I feel I kind of felt like this is my problem with Batman versus Superman. I felt like Jesse Eisenberg was incorrectly cast as Lex Luthor. They should have gotten someone like Bryan Cranston or James Wood, or someone who had like an imposing figure. And what do you think about that assessment? Do you agree with me, or you're like, no, I think he worked. I think it was just the direction of the film.
My first comparison was actually to the villain from the '90s Shadow movie with Alec Baldwin. It's because it has a very similar kind of bad guy to it, where it's like an ancient Egyptian god that's being like brought back into modern day, and you just see him walking around New York and just interacting with people. And like there's an idea there that can work, but it doesn't really deliver on it in any sort of way. I never really got the sense of what his the threat was, or what his grand threat was, other than the fact that he's basically immortal and he just does whatever the heck he wants. In a sort of writing level, I think he's underwritten, but yeah, I mean, the actor they picked, he's kind of generic. He looks just like some guy you'd pick off the street to be the third villain in a movie franchise. And even when he's like fully transformed into his full like Sumerian vampire form, it's really silly. It's not something I'm scared of, really. It's not really a good imposing figure for Blade to be fighting against. Like, I don't remember the villains in the first two movies all that well, but at least I remember them being formidable in some capacity. Like, I guess like, oh, someone's gonna die if these guys don't stop. Okay, so but this one, he just felt so generic and silly. Like it doesn't really, it's not imposing. And the actor himself, I don't know. He kind of reminds me of the guy who played Sabretooth in X-Men Origins. Like,
Liev Schreiber.
Yeah, Liev Schreiber's a great actor. He's good in other movies, but in this, he was silly, and it looked weird, and the CGI was awkward, and it's the same deal with this. Maybe if you had an older actor who is just this like ancient imposed figure, then yeah, it might have been scary, but I don't know. You could make a younger actor make it work too, because he's supposed to be like an immortal, ageless vampire. So
Yeah, I guess, and maybe that's part of the thing too. And so if I was fixing this film, as we're saying, I would have casted an older veteran actor that audiences were familiar with. And like I said, now, like if they were making Blade Trinity today, Dominic Perel, I'd be like, oh yeah, he's perfect. But back then he looked, and I hate to say this, and I mean this, and I don't mean this to insult him, but back then he looked like he had just come off the WB. And he's got and like you said, like you weren't really sure what his thing was, because at times he seemed bothered by the other vampires, right? These are his children, and to me I was kind of like when they say, oh, we need your help to so we can become daywalkers again, and he was just like, whatever. It's like it's like he never really caught on to their big plan. It was like you were saying, he's like, I'm gonna do whatever I want because I'm like this immortal Sumerian god. And so if I was, and also too, I wouldn't have tried to turn him into a monster at the end. If I'm fixing it, I would have just given him some really cool armor and do kind of like a last battle between him and Blade, something like like when Bruce Lee fights Chuck Norris in Way of the Dragon. I would have just this big build up to their battle. Is there another way you would have fixed that climax?
I would make it so that his resurrection ultimately forces the bad vampire group to kind of congeal and work with Blade. Because when you awaken the immortal Lovecraftian demigod from the beginning of time, generally I'm surprised to see him just walking around New York like he doesn't really care. Like you think he'd be like, he'd walk straight into the United Nations and be like, I am your king now, and just like start unleashing bats everywhere, or just you'd think he'd do something like just try to conceal power or take over the vampire cult or take over the world, something like that. Like give him a reason to like make everyone around him being like, yeah, we gotta stop that guy. Like that would actually be a plot. Like, oh, the new vampires think they can awake the Lovecraftian abyss, and then oh, oops, we've unleashed the Lovecraftian abyss on New York. We should probably get Blade to stop it. Like, there's an idea, and then maybe Blade dies at the end, and new vampires have to take over for him or something. It would have been something.
One good thing to come out of the Blade trilogy, and like I said, the first two films, like you said, they don't really stand out, but they're good, fun action films to watch. But one good thing is Whisper, Abraham Whisper, who's his Blade's mentor, he was actually created for the films. He wasn't a comic book character. A lot of people don't know that, and you know me, we've had this conversation, Tyler. I don't like it when they change things or add characters that are unnecessary or gender swap characters. You know me, I hate that. But I was like, oh, this is actually a good addition. And I think he actually appeared in Spider-Man the animated series after that, because it had like a Blade crossover, which was really weird, but it was a Halloween special. For those of you who don't know, 90s Fox Kids was big time censorship. They wouldn't even let the characters use real guns. And so all the police officers all have laser pistols in Spider-Man the animated series. They look like regular cops outside of that, but they've got laser pistols. But for a Halloween special, Fox let the creators of the show have a Blade crossover, and it was glorious, as they say. But Whisper is introduced, and then later he was introduced in the comics. So that is one cool thing. So one final note. Tell me a couple of other things Tyler, if you were making Blade Trinity, you just got off the Del Toro train. If you were making this Blade Trinity, how would you have fixed the films? I know you touched on a couple of things, but how would you put your own thumbprint as it was on Blade Trinity if you were directing or writing or whatever?
Well, I gotta say, we're making this hypothetical on the assumption that we care more than the people who made this seem to have. Like,
that's true.
I think I don't know if these people put a lot of thought into it. I think they're like, oh, we got to make a third Blade movie, so they just just throw it out, and you got to draft.
Goyer's available.
Yeah, whoever's available. Ryan Reynolds, great. But yeah, If I were actually to care and make a third Blade movie that was proper, or even a fourth one at this point, because Wesley Snipes, I know they hired the guy from Green Book to be the new Blade for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they could have gotten Wesley Snipes back.
Yeah.
But if I were to do that, I don't know. Keep it simple. Focus on what's important. Focus on one or two of these hotlines. Like, part of me kind of thinks they should stuck with like the first plot line where it's the everyone in New York finds out about Blade, and now Blade has to deal with everyone in New York knowing who he is. Like, there's an idea there. That could be fun. Like, oh, New York real life finds out that vampires exist. That's going to cause some interesting problems. That didn't just follow the logic train of where that goes, and then maybe bring the ancient Sumerian demigod in the background, and then Blade can beat him, and then everyone realizes Blade was the good guy all along. So yeah, just a simple premise where Blade has an arc, and Blade has other characters to hang out with, and there are people who actually explain what's happening in the story in a competent way, and yeah, like I said, bring back the Equilibrium guys. They could have done. They could do something with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tyler, where can people find you?
My primary stomping grounds are Geeks Under Grace, where I do, like now I'm doing like 3 articles a week as I am bored. I also infrequently write for Hollywood and Toto, Rubbler. You can find stuff I've written on the Daily Wire. I have old stuff at Legal Insurrection, and I have a YouTube channel where I host my own podcast, the GroupThink podcast, where I have mercilessly bullied your host multiple times. So,
True. And of course, you can find me right here on StudioJake. Be sure to like this video, share it out, and subscribe, and check out my blog. I actually have a review of Blade Trinity on my blog, so you can go there. It's in the archives. Just search in the search bar Blade Trinity, and it'll come up. I won't regurgitate it here, but feel free to go back there and read it. It's just jacobairy.blog. So, Tyler, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Sure thing. I appreciate it.
Everyone, I'll see you next time right here on Studio Jake.